Welcome to the debate. Right now, there is a short romance novel selling over 10,000 copies a month on Amazon. It is generating thousands of dollars in revenue, and it has hundreds of glowing five-star reviews from readers who are deeply moved by the ending. But there is a catch,
A rather large catch, yeah.
a huge catch. A human being didn't write a single word of it. A machine did. I mean, it plotted the narrative arc, generated the prose, designed the cover, and even optimized the search keywords to put it right in front of eager readers.
And that is happening right under our noses across, well, pretty much every single creative discipline you can think of.
Exactly. Today, we are examining a profound global economic shift driven by what we call transformative artificial intelligence, or TAI. We aren't talking about autocomplete or, a helpful chatbot anymore.
No, not at all.
We're talking about fully autonomous systems that independently generate, market, and sell content end-to-end. The central question we are debating today is this: do the immense efficiency benefits and the staggering global economic growth generated by these systems justify the widespread, permanent displacement of human creative professionals?
That is the core of it, yeah.
Right. And from my perspective, TAI represents an unprecedented democratization of production. It shatters legacy bottlenecks, it scales perfectly, and it drives just massive global efficiency.
And I look at this exact same phenomenon and I see a devastating commoditization of art. I mean, we are talking about the complete substitution of human artists globally by autonomous AI systems. These agents are optimizing for volume and virality, wiping out millions of creative jobs and basically replacing irreplaceable human originality with a flood of synthetic noise.
Well, let's lay out the foundations of our positions here. We have to understand that reliance on AI in the business world is no longer just a neat tool for augmenting human effort. It's not just a spell checker.
Right.
It is becoming the foundational architecture of the global economy. I mean, McKinsey projects that AI will add $13 trillion to the global GDP by 2030.
13 trillion.
13 trillion. That is not an incremental bump, That is a total rewiring of how value is created. And in the creative sector specifically, autonomous agents are entirely eliminating traditional human bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks being people?
Bottlenecks being the limitations of time, cost, and access. Look at platforms like Runway ML generating broadcast-quality short films purely from text prompts. Or look at Suno.ai, which is autonomously composing full tracks using spectral synthesis and rhyme-conditioned language models.
Wait, hold on. Before you go further, let's translate that for a second. For listeners who aren't audio engineers, spectral synthesis basically means the AI isn't just pasting pre-recorded guitar loops or drum samples together.
Right.
It is mathematically generating the actual sound waves from scratch.
Exactly. It's building the physics of the sound itself. And the economic benefit here is that production now scales linearly with computing power. These systems operate in an end-to-end loop. They come up with an idea. They draft it, they refine it through self-critique, meaning the AI literally acts as its own editor, checking its output against a set of rules. And then they deploy that SEO-optimized content directly to the web via smart contracts.
And what does that actually do to the market, though?
It creates immense value because it democratizes access for global talent. Cloud providers like AWS Bedrock, which is, Amazon's service for hosting these foundation models, they now offer TI as a service for just a single penny per generation, 1 cent.
Wow.
That empowers a startup in Nigeria or Vietnam to compete on the exact same visual and auditory footing as a legacy Hollywood studio. The barrier to entry drops to practically zero, and the sheer volume of global creative output just explodes.
Yeah. Well, you call it an explosion of global creative output. I call it market saturation that literally destroys the livelihood of the working artist.
How so?
I mean, if you are a freelance graphic designer or a working musician listening to this right now, the numbers should send a chill down your spine. The International Labor Organization estimates we are staring down the loss of 2 million content creator jobs globally by 2030.
It's a harsh transition, I won't deny that.
It's not a transition, it's an erasure. This hyper-efficiency isn't elevating human creativity, it is burying it.
But isn't a higher volume of creative goods a net positive for consumers? I mean, more content, more tailored to their interests?
Not when it fundamentally alters the nature of the product itself. Because AI can undercut human labor at literally 1/1000th of the cost. It isn't just competing in a fair market, it is flooding the market to the point of total irrelevance. The MIT projection estimates we will see 1 trillion AI-generated images by 2027. 1 trillion.
And those images are serving specific commercial purposes, right? They aren't just random noise.
Are they, though? Let's look at how these systems actually operate in the wild. When you have autonomous agents orchestrating frameworks like AutoGPT, what that actually looks like in practice is a software loop that constantly scrapes the web for trending topics, churns out dozens of variants of an image or an article, and then A/B tests them relentlessly against human attention spans.
It's just finding what works.
It's identifying the lowest common denominator of what makes a person click and weaponizing it. A system that optimizes purely for volume inherently degrades the value and the originality of art. We are substituting the human perspective with algorithmic filler just to appease a corporate obsession with scalability.
Okay, let's transition from those macroeconomic projections down to the specific mechanics of how TAI actually outcompetes human artists in the market. Because I think the definition of efficiency is where we really diverge here.
Fair enough.
Businesses thrive on TY specifically because of its ability to process data and iterate infinitely without the physical limits of a human worker. Take e-commerce, for example. In China, Beidou has a system called Ernie VLG. It automatically creates e-commerce fashion renders and product visuals, hallucinating perfect lighting and fabric textures instantly, and then it deploys them directly to platforms like Taobao.
Right, entirely replacing the ecosystem of product photographers, lighting technicians, and retouchers.
Yes, but internal metrics from 2025 show that these AI-generated visuals convert at a 20% higher rate than traditional photography. The algorithm figures out exactly what visual cues trigger a purchase better than a human photographer ever could.
But higher conversion rates on a sweater don't equate to artistic value.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, well, we have to look at the ultimate beneficiary here, which is the consumer.
Okay.
Think about the transition we are seeing with autonomous vehicles right now. When Waymo replaces human drivers with end-to-end AI utilizing LiDAR fusion and reinforcement learning, the per-mile cost of a ride drops from over $1 to 30 cents.
Right, sure.
The efficiency translates directly to consumer surplus. AI does the exact same thing for creative output. It drops the cost of production to near zero, providing the end consumer with highly tailored, infinitely optimized content. If the algorithm finds the exact pixel configuration or narrative beat that delights the audience 20% more effectively, that is a massive creation of value.
You know, I hear that comparison a lot, and I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are equating human expression to a taxi ride.
Well, both are services delivered to a consumer, aren't they?
But the fundamental nature of the transaction is completely different. A Waymo ride is a purely utilitarian transaction. You need to get from point A to point B safely. The efficiency is the entire point of the ride.
Right. Art, literature, and music are not utilitarian transit. We don't read books or listen to songs just to input data into our brains. We do it to connect with another human mind, to understand the human experience. When you apply that same logic of ruthless, automated efficiency to the creative arts, you hollow out the culture. A robot taxi gets me home, a robot novel gets me nowhere.
But the market responds to what it desires, does it not? I mean, if the reader enjoys the romance novel, the experience is still valid for them. The market responds to what is placed in front of it at scale. You mentioned the romance novel in your introduction. Let's dig into that. We have autonomous agents on Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. They are handling the plotting, the drafting, and using Stable Diffusion to generate the cover art and selling 10,000 copies a month.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And we have TAI literally cloning the distinct tone and style of popular startup essays, publishing them on Substack, and pulling in tens of thousands of subscribers at $10 a month.
Which proves the demand is there. People want the content.
It proves that an automated system is extracting capital from the creative economy without compensating a human worker. This efficiency you are praising fundamentally destroys the middle-class creator. The superstar might survive, sure, but the working graphic designer, the session musician, the mid-list author, they are wiped out. You are left with an algorithmically generated monoculture where the human is entirely substituted out of the equation.
Look, I completely understand the concern for the middle-class creator, and the transition is undeniably harsh. But if production costs approach zero, we have to look at who is newly enabled by this technology. You are framing this as a loss, but I see an unprecedented democratization of the global market.
I just don't see how.
TAI breaks down legacy gatekeepers that have historically kept independent, diverse voices out of the creative economy.
By replacing those voices with a machine?
No, by giving those voices the leverage of a machine. Consider the Singapore-based Tag Collective that recently sold $2 million in generative abstracts. They built an autonomous gallery and used smart contracts, code that executes automatically on a blockchain, to instantly split the royalties among the prompt engineers and curators.
Okay, but they are still just prompting a machine.
Or look at Indian startups like Sarvam AI. They are deploying autonomous agents to create localized Hindi and Tamil content on platforms like ShareChat.
Generating short-form video reels, right?
Exactly. They are generating highly polished reels that garner millions of views, and they are sharing that revenue through creator funds. We're talking about local creators who previously would never have had the capital to produce high-end content. They couldn't hire an animation studio. Now they don't need to. The AI isn't substituting them, it's scaling their localized ideas to a global audience.
But the reality on the ground is that instead of elevating local creators, rogue TAI simply steals their market share. You mentioned localized content, so let's look at the Brazilian funk scene.
Sure.
The favelas have an incredibly rich organic music culture. Right now, we are seeing autonomous agents analyze local trends, scrape the rhythmic structures of regional beats, and mimic local MCs on YouTube Music.
Producing completely synthetic funk tracks?
Yes. And these agents drop tracks that chart locally, completely siphoning ad revenue away from the actual human artists living in those favelas who created that culture in the first place. This isn't democratizing the favelas music, it is strip mining it.
I mean, it's competition.
It's unfair competition. The International Federation of the Phonographic Industry reported that 15% of streams in 2025 were AI-sourced filler tracks flooding SoundCloud. That is an autonomous system explicitly undercutting the human artist by producing endless, cheap substitutions.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. We have to separate the mechanics of the tool from the emotional outcome of the product. Let me ask you a direct question.
Go ahead.
There is a Dutch startup called Iva that produces TAI symphonies. These are entirely synthetic classical compositions. They are successfully being licensed for feature films right now.
Right, I've heard of them.
The algorithm generates the composition, it achieves the exact desired aesthetic the director wanted, and it delivers a profound emotional impact for the audience sitting in the theater.
Okay.
If the music works, if it moves the viewer to tears and perfectly scores the scene, why does the biological origin of the music matter?
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered how that system was built in the first place? It matters because of the systemic fragility it introduces when we remove human intermediaries from the creative process entirely. You are isolating the final product from its supply chain. The so-called efficiency of these self-sustaining loops is built entirely on uncompensated human labor.
You're referring to the model's training data.
Exactly. We cannot ignore the legal fragility here. The New York Times suing OpenAI over the ingestion of its articles is just the tip of the spear in these ongoing copyright wars.
Well, copyright law is...
These advanced generative models, these evolved architectures that Ava or Suno use, they only exist because they ingested the collective creative output of humanity without asking permission and without paying a dime for it. And now they are being deployed as autonomous agents to bankrupt the very people whose labor built them.
But the legal frameworks surrounding copyright will adapt to cover generative outputs. They always do when new technologies emerge.
But it's not just legal fragility. It's the mechanical risk of how these loops operate. When you have a multimodal TAI agent, an AI that can read text, generate video, and analyze audio, deploying content across platforms, it uses sentiment models to analyze engagement. It reads the comments, checks the watch time, and iterates automatically. Its only objective function is virality.
Meaning it adjusts its output to maximize user engagement.
Yes, and an agentic workflow that loops revenue back into its own computing costs, where the ad revenue from successful content automatically pays Amazon Web Services to keep the AI running, is a closed loop with zero human oversight.
Which makes it incredibly efficient.
Which makes it dangerous. A system optimizing purely for engagement will inevitably spread misinformation, amplify biases, and degrade the information ecosystem, because algorithms have learned that outrage, shock, and polarizing content are the most efficient drivers of virality. We are trusting our cultural narrative to self-selling software agents.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I will absolutely acknowledge the fragility of automated systems. We have historical precedents of algorithmic failures. Look at the finance sector. A decade ago, Knight Capital's algorithmic trading glitch erased $440 million in 45 minutes because a rogue loop ran unchecked.
Exactly my point. The damage is instantaneous and massive.
But what happened after that? The financial sector didn't throw their hands up and go back to human floor traders yelling on Wall Street. They developed resilience engineering. They built circuit breakers. The systems adapted.
But finance is a game of numbers and margins. Culture is not.
The underlying operational mechanics are exactly the same, though. We are entering an era where operations must be architected by algorithms to function at a global scale. We are seeing systems using blockchain for smart contracts on platforms like OpenSea, where royalties are instantly, transparently, and automatically distributed to 1,000 contributors in seconds. We see Stripe's AI handling fiat ramps, and for anyone outside the fintech space, a fiat ramp just means the bridge between traditional currency like US dollars and these digital ecosystems. It allows autonomous entities to transact seamlessly.
Removing the human from the transaction entirely.
Yes, because this is an evolutionary leap in how human commerce functions. Clinging to human intermediaries and processes that can be mathematically optimized is mathematically unsustainable. Yes, it forces a painful reinvention of the workforce, but trying to manually oversee a global economy that processes petabytes of data in real time is just a recipe for stagnation.
So we just accept the substitution? We accept that the 2 million human creators projected to lose their jobs by the ILO are just acceptable collateral damage for this so-called evolutionary leap?
I wouldn't call it collateral damage.
We are taking the deepest, most profound expression of humanity, our art, our stories, our music, and handing it over to statistical models simply because it scales cheaper on AWS Bedrock.
We aren't handing it over, we are elevating the baseline of what can be produced globally. Let's summarize where we stand, because I think the fault lines of our disagreement are incredibly clear here.
I agree.
From my perspective, transformative AI marks a necessary, inevitable evolution from human limitation to computational abundance. By substituting legacy workflows and reducing the cost of creative production to near zero, it scales infinitely across borders. It builds a $13 trillion economic engine.
But at what cost?
It democratizes creation, allowing anyone with an idea to execute it at a professional, Hollywood-grade level. It undeniably forces a painful reinvention of what it means to be a professional creator, I will grant you that. But the ultimate result is a world where high-quality, highly optimized content is abundant, cheap, and accessible to everyone.
Well, I come at it from a different way. I believe that efficiency is an incredibly poor, dangerous metric for creativity. The numbers speak for themselves, but they tell a tragic story. The loss of 2 million global jobs, the flooding of the market with 1 trillion synthetic images by 2027, the scraping of local cultures to produce algorithmically generated filler, this all represents a massive, unprecedented commoditization of art. We're sacrificing irreplaceable human originality and the livelihoods of millions of working artists on the altar of corporate scalability.
We certainly agree that there is a profound tension here. The push to democratize production and drive economic efficiency is undeniably colliding with the commoditization of human expression.
It is. As AI continues to redefine creativity as mere computation, society is going to have to urgently develop entirely new paradigms for how we assign value to human labor in an AI-authored world.
The substitution is happening, and the economic incentives driving it are immense. It leaves us with a critical question for our listeners to weigh. When you look closely at the invisible factory of the modern creative economy, and you see the algorithm silently stamping out the culture of tomorrow, is the immense abundance we gain worth the humanity we automate away? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.